My name is Anita Briggs, and I'm 34 years old. For most of my adult life, I believed that love meant being steady, not flashy, not loud, just dependable enough that the people you care about never have to worry about the ground beneath their feet shifting. I've always been that person, the foundation type. Some people are fireworks, brilliant, unpredictable, gone before you can really grasp what you just saw. I was the concrete beneath the house, unseen, uncelebrated, but necessary. For 4 years, I was the foundation for Christopher Caldwell. When Christopher decided to leave his sales job because it was killing his creativity, I didn't argue. I covered the rent on our downtown apartment so he could figure himself out. When his car broke down, I handed him my keys and started commuting by train to my job as a senior data systems consultant. I told myself that partnerships weren't about keeping score, they were about trust. I thought if I built a stable enough world, he'd feel safe enough to thrive inside it. What I didn't understand then was the danger of being too reliable. People stop seeing effort when it never falters. They stop saying thank you, and eventually they start resenting you for being the thing they lean on. That resentment arrived in the form of Lila Moreno. Lila was Christopher's ex-girlfriend, technically, from years ago, at least according to him. A creative consultant, a lifestyle photographer, which I later learned was code for someone with a very expensive camera and no pressing need to earn money. She floated through life in silk blouses and half-formed plans, talking about energy and intuition like they paid rent. She re-entered Christopher's life quietly. At first, she was just someone he bumped into at an event. Then she was texting him for advice. Then she was suddenly his closest friend. I tried to be understanding. I invited her to dinner. I listened when Christopher talked about her ideas with that brightness in his eyes I hadn't seen in a while. I told myself I wasn't the jealous type that trust was stronger than insecurity. But something shifted. I'd come home after 10-hour days of system migrations and security audits to find them already there, wine glasses in hand, music playing my apartment, feeling like a place I'd stumbled into rather than lived in. Lila spoke in a way that made me feel outdated, like I was an artifact from a life Christopher was slowly shedding. One night, I found them drinking a bottle of wine I'd been saving for our anniversary. "Oh, Anita, you're home," Christopher said absently, eyes still on his phone. Lila smiled at me, polite, sharp, assessing. She talked about a gallery opening on a Tuesday night, something spontaneous, something alive. "Don't you have that early client call tomorrow?" I asked Christopher gently. Lila laughed, light, musical, dismissive. "That's the thing about you, Anita," she said. "You're always thinking about schedules. Creativity doesn't work like that." Christopher nodded. "She's right. Sometimes it feels like everything with you is so structured." That was the first time I felt it. The shift. The moment I realized I wasn't being appreciated for holding everything together, I was being blamed for it. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of my disappearance. The word didn't land all at once. It crept in gradually, disguised as concern humor or gentle criticism, the kind that pretends to be helpful while quietly hollowing you out. At first it was small things. Christopher stopped asking if I wanted to come along when he met friends from his creative circle. He'd phrase it casually like he was doing me a favor. "It's going to be loud," he'd say. "You probably wouldn't enjoy it." Or, "It's a lot of shop talk, you'd be bored." I'd nod, even smile, because I didn't want to be the person who needed constant reassurance. But then the stories stopped too. I used to know everything about his days, the people he met, the ideas he chased, the frustrations that kept him up at night. Slowly, those details disappeared. When I asked how his meeting went, he'd give me vague answers already half turned toward his phone. Later, I'd hear the real version accidentally when Lila was around, and they were replaying it together like a private performance I wasn't invited to. The apartment started to feel like a waiting room. I was welcome to exist there, but not to participate. One night after I mentioned a possible promotion at work, something I'd been quietly grinding toward for over a year, Christopher barely looked up. "That's great," he said, distracted. Then almost immediately he added, "Lila helped me make this vision board today." It really opened my eyes about how money isn't everything. I remember standing there, still holding my laptop bag, wondering if he heard himself. Another time I suggested a weekend away. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet cabin, somewhere we could breathe. Christopher sighed like I'd asked him to cancel a limb. "Lila thinks that kind of isolation is bad for momentum," he said. "She says growth happens when you're immersed in energy." Energy. That word started replacing everything that used to matter. If I asked about bills, I was fixated. If I mentioned responsibility, I was anxious. If I expressed discomfort, I was blocking the flow. The first time he actually said it, we were standing in the kitchen. I'd come home exhausted, shoulders tight from a day of solving other people's problems. Lila was there again, perched on the counter, like she belonged there, swirling a glass of wine, my wine. "You okay?" Christopher asked, glancing at me. "I'm just tired," I said. "It's been a long day." Lila tilted her head, studying me with that careful smile. "You know," she said, "sometimes the way you enter a room changes the whole atmosphere." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Christopher answered for her. "She just means you bring a lot with you. Stress. Weight. Weight. There it was. I'm just saying." Lila continued smoothly. "When you're around, Christopher gets in his head. He starts worrying if you're bored or judging or counting minutes. It makes everything feel heavy." Christopher didn't correct her. He nodded. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. I realized I wasn't being seen as a partner anymore. I was an obstacle, a mood, a liability. The person who paid for the lights but dimmed the vibe. Over the next few weeks, the pattern solidified. I was invited to pay, not to participate. I was consulted for logistics, not opinions. I was appreciated for stability, not presence. And worst of all, I started shrinking to make myself easier to tolerate. I laughed less, spoke softer, chose silence instead of disagreement. I told myself that if I just stayed calm enough, light enough, useful enough, things would rebalance. They didn't. What actually happened was simpler and crueler. Christopher stopped seeing me as essential. And once someone decides you're optional, they start acting like you're in the way. I didn't confront him. I didn't plead. I started watching instead. The breaking point didn't arrive with a scream. It didn't come wrapped in slammed doors or raised voices. It arrived quietly in the reflection of a mirror, and that somehow made it worse. The Black and Gold Gala had been all Christopher talked about for weeks. It was the official launch of a new creative collective. Lila had been consulting on a room full of influencers, art buyers, brand managers, people. Christopher desperately wanted to impress. He framed it as a turning point, the night everything would finally shift for him. The irony was impossible to ignore. The tickets were paid for with my money. The clothes were charged to our joint card. I came home that evening to find him in the bedroom, standing in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the cuff of his tailored jacket. He looked good, confident, animated, alive in a way I hadn't seen in months. I started loosening my hair, reaching for the dress I'd already set out. "The gala starts at 8, right?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he exhaled long and heavy, like I'd asked him something unreasonable. "Anita," he said, finally turning toward me, "about tonight." Something in his tone made my hands still. "I think it's better if you stay home." I stared at him, waiting for the rest of the sentence, the joke, the explanation, the apology. None of it came. "Excuse me," I said. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes flicking toward the mirror instead of mine. "It's a very specific crowd. Creative directors. People in the flow. Lila and I talked about it, and she doesn't like when you're around." The words landed with surgical precision. "She doesn't like when I'm around," I repeated slowly, "at a public event that I helped pay for." He frowned. "Don't make it technical." "Technical." My voice dropped. "Christopher, she's your ex. She's a collaborator," he snapped. Then softer, almost rehearsed. "She says when you're there, I get distracted. I start worrying if you're uncomfortable. It pulls me out of my element. And that's my fault. She says you make the energy heavy." There it was again. I looked at him. Really looked at him, standing there in clothes funded by my consistency, asking me to disappear so another woman could feel more comfortable. "The energy is heavy," I repeated, "but the money isn't." He stiffened. "Why does everything have to come back to that?" "Because that's reality," I said quietly. "That dress, those shoes, this apartment, they exist because someone is thinking about logistics." He slammed his hand against the dresser. "God, Anita, this is exactly why she doesn't want you there. You turn everything into a responsibility. You're a safety net that started to feel like a cage." "A cage." The word echoed. "Tonight is about my future," he continued. "And honestly, you're not part of that flow." The old version of me would have argued, would have cried, would have tried to explain that love shouldn't require erasure. But I'd already done the math. I'd already opened a separate account, already signed a lease across town, already started preparing for the moment when the mask came off completely. "Okay," I said. He blinked. "Okay, I won't come." He looked confused, almost disappointed. "Well," he said slowly, recovering good, "it's for the best. Just order food or something. I'll be home late." "I'm sure you will," I replied. He grabbed his jacket and left the door closing softly behind him. And just like that, the waiting ended. I didn't order food. I picked up my phone and sent a single word to a number I'd saved a week earlier. Go. 10 minutes later, a white, unmarked van pulled into the service entrance of our building. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. I didn't cry while they worked. That surprised me most. Two professionals stepped out of the service elevator with the calm efficiency of people who had done this hundreds of times before. They didn't ask why. They didn't ask questions that required emotion. They simply nodded when I explained what needed to happen. Everything with a blue sticker stays, I said evenly. Everything else goes. I want it to look like I was never here. They moved fast, precise, methodical. I watched as my desk was dismantled. My books boxed, my clothes folded, with a respect Christopher hadn't shown me in months. Each item leaving the apartment felt less like a loss and more like a release, a subtraction that finally made the equation make sense. I walked through the rooms slowly while they worked. The kitchen where I'd packed lunches while Christopher slept in. The couch where I'd sat alone while he texted Lila 5 feet away. The bedroom where I'd started apologizing for needs that were never unreasonable. I cleared my toiletries from the bathroom, my toothbrush, my skincare. The perfume he used to say smelled like home. I left everything of his untouched. His clutter, his half-finished projects, his vision boards taped crookedly to the wall. By 11:30 p.m., the apartment was hollow in a way that felt intentional, not empty resolved. I stood alone for a moment, keys in my hand, listening to the hum of a place I'd paid for but no longer belonged to. Then I locked the door and didn't look back. My new apartment was smaller, but it breathed. High ceilings, white walls, dark hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, like a circuit board glowing in the dark. It wasn't decorated yet. There were boxes stacked unevenly, but it was quiet in a way that didn't feel lonely. It felt safe. At 2:12 a.m., my phone began to vibrate on the glass coffee table. Christopher. I let it ring. Then the messages came. Anita, where are you? Why are the lights off? Why is the closet empty? What the hell is going on? My key isn't working. Answer your phone. I answered on the 5th call. His voice cracked immediately. Where are you? What did you do? The apartment is half empty. It's not a robbery, I said calmly. It's a relocation. A relocation. He laughed, panicked. What are you talking about? Lila is downstairs in an Uber. We were going to have people over. I closed my eyes, not in pain and clarity. I realized you were right tonight, I said. I was a cage. I was heavy. So I removed the redundant variable. You're being insane, he shouted. You can't just end a 4-year relationship over one party. Come back. We'll talk in the morning. There's nothing to talk about, I replied. You told me I don't belong in your world. I listened. His tone shifted softer now, strategic. Anita, please, I didn't mean it like that. I don't have rent for next month without you. I looked out at the city lights, steady and indifferent. Tell Lila to find her flow and use it to pay the landlord, I said. Since she doesn't like me around, I decided to make it permanent. You're doing this to punish me, he hissed. No, I said quietly. I am doing this to preserve myself. There was silence on the line. Then I ended the call. I blocked his number. For the first time in months, the apartment was completely still, and the silence didn't feel heavy at all. The first month after I left was defined by silence. Not the awkward kind, not the kind that begs to be filled, the kind that settles, the kind that lets your nervous system finally unclench. While my world grew quieter, Christopher's began to unravel. I didn't hear about it directly at first. I wasn't checking his social media. I wasn't asking mutual friends for updates. I was too busy rebuilding the parts of myself I'd put on hold, cooking real meals again, sleeping without knots in my chest, rediscovering what it felt like to come home without bracing for emotional negotiations. But consequences have a way of traveling faster than distance. 2 weeks after I moved out, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in months. Linda Caldwell, Christopher's mother. I almost didn't answer. Anita, she snapped the moment I picked up. Do you have any idea what you've done? I moved out, I said evenly, which I'm allowed to do. He's falling apart, she hissed. The landlord served a notice. The utilities are past due. You close the account. I closed my account, I corrected. Christopher is an adult. That's retaliatory, she said sharply. You were the provider. You have a moral obligation not to leave him stranded. I smiled, a small humorless thing. Linda, I said, I don't have obligations to a man who told me my presence was a cage while wearing clothes I paid for. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. You need to come over there, pay the arrears, and sit down like a decent woman, she spat. Tell Christopher to ask Lila, I replied. She seems very invested in his energy. I hung up before she could respond. A few days later, the updates came through the side door from Marissa, a mutual friend who'd always tried to stay neutral. "It's bad," she said carefully when we met for coffee. "Lila's gone." I raised an eyebrow. "Already?" "The second the eviction notice showed up," Marissa said. She suddenly had a creative opportunity in Costa Rica, left him with the utility bills and a maxed-out credit card. I nodded, unsurprised. Christopher had built a life on borrowed stability. When the foundation disappeared, everything else collapsed. He tried to reach me through other means after that. Emails to my work address, voicemails from unfamiliar numbers, messages that oscillated wildly between rage and remorse. "I didn't mean it. She manipulated me. You're overreacting. I can't do this without you." I didn't respond. Because silence wasn't punishment, it was clarity. Then came the final public humiliation. The creative collective Lila had been consulting for was exposed as a financial scam. Investors lost money. Brand partnerships evaporated overnight. Anyone associated with it became radioactive. Christopher's reputation burned with it. By the time the dust settled, he wasn't just broke, he was professionally untouchable. And me, I was promoted to Director of Systems Architecture 3 months later. No drama, no speech, just quiet recognition. That's when I realized something I wish I'd understood sooner. Stability isn't boring, it's invisible until it's gone. Regret doesn't arrive all at once. It circles first testing boundaries, searching for cracks before it gets desperate enough to knock. By the 4th month, Christopher stopped pretending his messages were about reconciliation. They were about survival. Since I'd blocked his number, he started emailing me professionally formatted subject lines, carefully neutral, as if distance could be negotiated through tone. Subject: "Just need to talk. Anita, I'm being evicted. I have nowhere to go. My mom won't take me in. I know I said things I shouldn't have. I was frustrated. Please. Just lend me $5,000 and I'll never bother you again." I stared at the screen longer than I meant to. Not because I was tempted, but because it was such a perfect summary of who he'd become. He didn't miss me. He missed the safety net. I archived the email without replying. A week later, another one arrived. Subject: "Please, I miss my best friend. I miss your voice. Lila ruined everything. She used me. I see that now." I didn't respond to that either. Because the truth was simple. If Lila hadn't left, he wouldn't have noticed I was gone. That realization hardened something in me, not into bitterness, but into certainty. The final message came 2 weeks later, shorter than the rest. "I can't keep living like this." I didn't answer. Not because I was cruel, but because I'd finally learned that I wasn't responsible for managing the consequences of someone else's choices. Then, 8 months after the night, I left our paths crossed again. I was standing in the VIP lounge at the city's most prestigious tech gala, glass of champagne in hand, finishing a conversation with a venture capitalist. The room was full of low lighting, polished shoes, quiet confidence. That's when I saw him. Christopher stood near the service entrance wearing a suit that didn't quite fit anymore. His posture was different, smaller, tired. He was working the event as temporary staff, handing out branded gift bags to people he once believed were his peers. And then our eyes met. He froze. I didn't. He handed his tray to a coworker and walked toward me slowly, like someone approaching a line he already knew he shouldn't cross. "Anita," he said quietly, "you look incredible." "Hello, Christopher," I replied evenly. "It's been a while." "I saw your name in the program," he said quickly. "Director. Innovator of the Year nominee." I couldn't believe it. "It's been a busy year," I said. He swallowed. "I tried to reach you. I'm so sorry. Lila was a monster. She used me. I'm living in a boarding house. I'm working 3 jobs just to keep my head above water." He reached for my arm. I stepped back. "I heard things were difficult," I said calmly. "Difficult." His voice cracked. "It's been hell. You are the only real thing in my life. Please, can we talk somewhere private? I don't want your money. I just want to hear your voice." "You're hearing it now," I said. And for the first time, he had nothing else to say. Christopher's eyes searched my face like there might still be a version of me willing to soften. There wasn't. "Please," he said again, quieter this time. "Just 5 minutes. I know I don't deserve it, but—" "What would 5 minutes change?" I asked, my voice calm enough to sting. "Would it undo the months you spent telling me I was a burden?" His jaw tightened. I was wrong. "Yes," I said, "you were." He flinched at how easily I agreed. "I didn't realize what I had," he continued. Desperation creeping back into his tone. "You were my rock, my stability. Everything fell apart when you left." "That's not because I left," I replied. "It's because you built your life on something you didn't respect." His eyes filled. "So that's it, 4 years, and you're just Done. I glanced around the room at the quiet power, the ease, the people who belonged, without demanding permission. It meant everything to me, then I said, but meaning doesn't survive contempt. He shook his head, anger flashing through the shame. You're just going to stand there in your perfect life and watch me drown. I checked my watch. I'm not watching you drown, Christopher, I said evenly. I'm not watching you at all. This is the first time I've thought about you in months. His face hardened into that old, entitled mask, the one I used to mistake for confidence. I hate you, he muttered. I smiled, not cruelly, not kindly, just honestly. Maybe I said, but I'm free, and that's enough. A voice echoed across the room announcing the next award category. I stepped around him without another word. I didn't look back. The lights on the stage were warmer than I expected. As I walked forward, the applause washed over me in a way that felt distant, not because it wasn't real, but because it wasn't the point. The award was placed in my hands, cool and solid, engraved with my name, Anita Briggs. For a brief moment, I saw my reflection in its polished surface and barely recognized the woman looking back. She stood straighter. She breathed easier. When I turned toward the audience, my gaze drifted just once to the place where Christopher had been standing moments earlier. He was gone. Not dramatically, not in tears, just absent, as if he'd already begun fading from a life he no longer belonged in. And that was when it hit me. The most satisfying part of the night wasn't the recognition. It wasn't the applause. It wasn't even the vindication. It was the silence. No tension waiting at home. No bracing myself for dismissal. No shrinking to make someone else comfortable. Just space. In the weeks that followed, my life didn't suddenly become perfect. It became honest. I furnished my apartment, slowly, deliberately, choosing pieces that felt like me, not compromises. I cooked dinners without checking the time. I slept through the night. I laughed more than I had in years, and when I was quiet, it was because I wanted to be. Every now and then, someone would ask about Christopher. I never gave details. He's part of my past, I'd say, and that was enough. Because the truth was this: I hadn't destroyed him. I hadn't punished him. I'd simply stopped holding up a world that didn't value the person keeping it standing. And when I finally stepped away, I learned something I wish I'd known from the beginning. Being the foundation doesn't mean you have to stay buried. It means you get to choose where and for